Really quick video on how to do the impulse pattern. The impulse pattern's done using slip dots, and then the glaze flows around the slip. So to do my dots, I use Azim slip trailer, one of the bottles with adjustable nozzles, so you can control how much comes out with the nozzles, and I'm using the fat one, which I think is 1 millimeter and a bit. The real trick to this is getting the slip consistency right, and what you're looking for is so that you get this bead. It's not formed any sharp peaks, so if you did a dot and pulled up, it rounds itself off. That's what you're looking for. If it goes to sharp peaks, it will dry with sharp peaks, and when they're fired they'll poke through and it will be uncomfortable to hold, and ceramics can go to a point that's sharp enough to cut you, so that is not ideal. You don't want it too runny, because the water content will mean that it shrinks. So you want a middle ground like that, where it beads up. As it shrinks, it will maybe go down by 1/3, but it doesn't form sharp peaks and it doesn't disappear completely. So that's what you're aiming for. Okay, so here's the piece. This is basically bone dry. Now you can do it to bone dry, you can do it to leather hard. I wouldn't advise trying to do it before, just because you want the clay to absorb the slip at least a little bit as you're putting it on, so that you can turn the piece. If the slip stayed runny, as you turned it round, the dots would want to keep running. This way, by the time they get vertical, they've already set enough that they're not going to move. So relatively dry piece, dots, and then that line is drawn on in Sharpie. It will burn off in the bisque firing. You see me do it quite a lot. Most of the patterns have a Sharpie on it in some form or another, and it doesn't affect the final piece. So make sure you've got plenty of slip and no air at the bottom, and then you want to kind of do it without pausing too much, because every time you release the pressure on the bottle, air will go back in, and the worst thing is to have to, when you get an explosion, try and quite, wish I'd picked a better point to record from, so I can't really. You want to rest your arms on things as much as possible, so I'm using the table edge. You don't want to just hold it floating in air, because you want to be more precise than that. So like throwing, the more you can work with your two hands together, the better. So I do dot every centimetre or so, and there's not too much you can do wrong with the dots. You can make them have a wider base by pushing down to the piece before squeezing, and you can make them have a narrower base by just touching the surface, if that makes sense. I'll show you not on the piece in a second. Get a scrap bit of clay. Hopefully you can see what I mean about those dots. If they were runny, you'd have issues when you got them to vertical, and with mugs they'd be on the outside, so there's always the risk that you'll knock them as you're as you get round to the far side. You're not the ones you started with. So having them dry relatively quickly is good, and there shouldn't be enough of a difference between the shrinkage of the two, because the dots are so small. They should stay put. You can't do it for bisque though, because they will, as they shrink, they'll fall off. Right, so this is the other crucial bit. As you come round to the end, the easiest way to get everything balanced is to stop. That's 3 dots worth out, and rather than trying to do 3 dots and get them spaced right, you can absorb a little bit of movement in either direction if this was slightly further out or slightly further in, by halving it and then halving it again. So go halfway and then half and half, and that means that even though the gaps aren't perfectly identical, because it's divided over 3, you don't actually, well, it's actually 4 gaps, but you don't see the difference. It's not 1 that's wrong, it's 3 that are slightly wrong, so it's more forgiving that way. And then you repeat the whole thing. This is for the way that I ended up doing the impulse, which is 2 lines staggered. But obviously, if you're doing a different pattern, you just do whatever you're doing. I wouldn't normally, there's a difficulty with recording as well. This is not the most comfortable position to do the dots in, but I'm trying to keep it so that the camera can see it. So find a more comfortable position where you can brace against things, and the positioning becomes easier. And then the whole point of these is that they'll give the glaze something to flow around, which will break up the movement in glazes that aren't particularly affected by the slip. But this is using my black slip, which is coloured with iron, chrome, cobalt and manganese, and some glazes will pick up colours from that. So I'll post a few fired examples of pieces after this, including some that pick up the colorants, because they're the more interesting ones in a lot of ways. And then obviously you can adjust what colorants you use. You could do this with white slip, and then it will just obviously you see the color of the slip break through, but then you won't get the color effect, you'll just get the pattern. Or you can do it with just cobalt and it'll pick up just the blue. Generally low silica and alumina, so kind of semi-crystalline or very runny glazes, will pick up the colour more and move with it. But yeah, it depends on the glaze. And here is a demonstration of what I mean about dots. So I'll find where focus is. About there. So you either, if you exaggerate it, you can either squidge right to the bottom and then flatten it down, and you'll end up with a wide base, or you can go the opposite way and try and get the smallest point of contact. You see it's a similar amount of slip but a very different profile. Which one you do is entirely up to you. I generally go for the wider base version of it, because I feel the flatter roundness is more comfortable. You don't want it sticking out of the glaze too much, but that will break up the glaze more dramatically because it's taller, and well, in some respects it will. Obviously that one forces the glaze out wider, that one the glaze can't flow over the top, and so it will break through more, and just depends what you want really. But just something to be aware of when you're applying it, that it's not just how much you put on, it's how you put it on that has an effect. Here's a demonstration again. Squidge around the bottom or don't, and you get different dots. And then you can see how it rounds. Even if I pull it to a peak, it rounds down, and that's what you're looking for in the slip. A thicker slip would stay at a peak, and the peak would stay there when you fired it. And so that's it. It's basically the entire all the things that I think you've got to consider when doing that, and then it's just a case of finding which style works for you and then what glazes you want to put over the top of it.